Manchester Geek Nights Ladies Who Code. No, Matt, can we please go back a slide? Thank you for that. So we put the tweet handles over there so you can tweet throughout the night, if that's okay with you guys. Hello to our remote viewers. If you have any questions throughout the talk, please use the handles at the back. Food and drinks. No, that's whole story. Huge thank you to AutoTrader for hosting this event for us tonight and making it all happen. You've got lovely offices, by the way. Tonight's talk will be around the Internet of Things, presented by Mat Henshall over here. Matt's been working in technology for over 30 years now, with experience in software system and product development and deployment. The past 16 years were spent in Silicon Valley working for various startups. His focus in the past 7 years has been Internet of Things and connected devices. He currently works at ThoughtWorks as a principal consultant, providing insight and advice on all things connected. So give a round of applause for Matt.
Thanks, guys. So the talk I'm about to give, some of the stuff you may already be aware of, but it's really good for us to sort of, as technologists and as geeks, to look at what effect our choices and our technologies have. So I'm going to run through a few interesting examples of what's happening now and what I think is going to be happening in the near future. The talk will last about 30 minutes, maybe longer, depending on whether I think of anything else to say while we're talking. And it also depends if you guys want to have questions. And typically what I find, this is a great opener for conversations. So at the end of the talk, we can have a discussion, talk about various things. You can ask any questions you want, ask yourselves questions. So as Lucas said, my background actually is very broad. I've worked in lots of different industries, from publishing to pharma to financial services to consumer electronics, a huge variety of different techs. And in fact, the last 8 years, I have been focused almost exclusively on what is now called the Internet of Things. Although, you could say the Internet of Things was around from the beginning, because the other word for the Internet of Things is the Internet. And back in '84, they connected a Coke machine to the precursor to the Internet to see whether or not the cans were cold enough to drink. I think it was Columbia University did that. But I mean, I do like shiny new objects, right? I am a geek. I love new tech and I love to see where it is. But in all of my career, even though I've worked in many different industries, the one thing that has connected it all together is I've been really interested in how tech changes our lives. And, I certainly was very early adopter of the internet. When I first went on the internet, I guess, was working on it. I think there were 100,000 servers. So back in the late 80s, early 90s, before the World Wide Web. So, excuse me 1 second. Technology, it's useless. I don't normally reference this quote, but I think it's really good. It was written back in the first industrial revolution. And as hopefully I'm going to show during the rest of this talk, we are still in this process of automation and bringing in new technology that is really going to change how we think about our lives and our workforce. Having said that, I think it's a really exciting time we live in. What's really happening is the march of faster, cheaper, lower power devices is really continuing to accelerate. I recently started working with a small embedded software system that has 192 parallel cores in it. It runs on batteries that can basically do simultaneous real-time image recognition of between 2 and 5 cameras. Right? And it's getting smaller and smaller and more powerful. So we will be able to have a light switch being able to run full artificial intelligence in. You have to ask the question why, but you could do that right now for probably in production, less than 50, 60 bucks. But at about the time my grandmother was born, which is in 1902, horses were the main form of transportation. And this actually led to a really serious problem. I don't know if you've thought about this or have heard of this before, but the really serious problem was horse shit, right? And the problem was what to do with it all. There was a lot of horse shit. So, for example, in New York City in 1900, it was reported that the vacant lots in Manhattan, of which there were quite a few, was 60 feet high in manure. Kind of a crazy thought. And the health and pollution aspects of that, you know, we always think of this idyllic horse-drawn age. No, it was a really nasty, smelly thing to have all these horses. I mean, to give an example, horse-drawn omnibuses needed teams of 11 horses, and there were 200,000 horses in New York and Manhattan Island, producing 2,500 tons of manure a day. Contrast, this is terrible, isn't it? Oh well. But you know, round about, I think it was 1898, there was an urban planning meeting was convened to discuss solutions. And it broke up after 3 days instead of the planned 10, because it was seen as an intractable problem. Nobody could see any solution to the horse manure issue. Now, in 1900, I'm sorry this is a very state-centered presentation, but I live in the States and I tend to give this talk to people from the States. But so imagine there's a very similar story for Manchester, I promise you. In fact, there's actually some great old footage of Manchester in the early 1900s. But in 1900, there were about 4,000 automobiles sold in the US, and by 1912, there was nearly 400,000. So we went, and in 14 years, we kind of went from city planners not seeing the implications of the coming automobile age to traffic counts in New York showing more cars than horses for the first time. So we went from, wow, I have no idea what we're going to do about it, to 14 years, the problem disappears. And pretty much by 1925, the horseless age was in full swing. And that intractable and solvent problem had disappeared. And it wasn't just horse manure that had disappeared. Entire industry sectors were disrupted, and the status quo across many trades was changed. To give you one small example, there was still about 4,500 carriage companies operating in the United States. Those are the carriage builders, the people who actually built the carriages that were drawn by the horses, were operating as late as 1914. And by 1925, there were barely 150. And by 1929, there were fewer than 90. And if you think about it, all of the trades and supporting skills around managing, feeding, caring for all of the 200,000 horses in New York had disappeared. Times Square used to be full of blacksmiths. And in a period of 20 years, that entire area had completely changed. So during a time of economic growth and a shortage of manual and semi-skilled labor, you know, these technologically unemployed people were no doubt quickly absorbed into the factories, the tunnel digging. There were 10,000 people digging tunnels in the early 1900s, and various other burgeoning industries. Okay, so as my grandmother was born at a time of the dawn of the horseless carriage, so my granddaughter, who was just born a couple of years ago, has been born into the age of not just driverless carriages, but the age of what I think is the autonomous machines. And that's really what the IoT is about. You know, today we are on the verge of a technological innovation whose impact is more wide-reaching and more profound than the Industrial Revolution and the rise of the horseless carriage. Because we really are at this dawn of this age of connected autonomous machines. Now, the poster child, of course, is the autonomous vehicle. You know, Tesla released a software update, I think, a few months ago that pretty much allows it to the Tesla cars to drive 95% of the time. In fact, I think there was the first speeding ticket given to an autonomous vehicle just about a month ago, which was kind of fun because it didn't actually know that it was a temporary reduced speed section, so got a ticket. So there's interesting side effects of this that we've got to work through on policy. And Tesla's founder, I've heard him quoted saying, Elon Musk has stated that he believes autonomous vehicles will be ubiquitous by 2025. And what I ask you to think about is 1900, horses were everything, and within 14 to 25 years, it was done. And of course, obviously, Google and everybody else is doing lots and lots of things. What I hear less talked about, although it is being talked about more, but when I first started doing the research for this talk, I saw very little talked about in the general press, is what the impact, just autonomous vehicles, never mind the other things we're going to talk about a little bit later, but just on the autonomous vehicles we're going to have on current industries, consumer behaviors, and urban planning. And we all, as geeks, need to really, I hope you don't mind me calling you all geeks. I assume it's a geek night, so I hope you are. As geeks, we really need to think about what we're doing and how this is going to impact our future so that we can influence policy. By the way, that wasn't a video showing earlier? Autonomous vehicles? I missed, my queuing on these slides is not always perfect. So cars are actually only driven around 4% of the time, They're actually parked for 90% of the time. And 30% of the time driving in the city is looking for parking. So that's certainly true in the States. I don't know what it's like in England. In America, the annual cost of car ownership is about $9,000 a year. That's right today. I'm sure it's more expensive in the UK, actually. And there's some really interesting studies. Columbia University, and it's well worth looking at some of these studies, they did a model where they demonstrated that if we have 9,000 autonomous vehicles to replace every taxi cab and Uber driver in New York City, we end up with a wait time of about 36 seconds and a cost of about 50 cents a mile. Right? And the cost of running an Uber type service or a taxi service, the driver is at least 75%. If you take into account depreciation, running costs, fuels, and everything else, it's still 75%. And this really is a massive incentive to create an autonomous transport plan. There's a continued move for the urbanization of the world's peoples. So massive cities are getting bigger, more cramped. Having these sort of autonomous transport plans is going to become almost unstoppable, if you think about it. And the money is huge. There's some real interesting impacts on that. PricewaterhouseCoopers predicted that the transport cloud will cause the domestic car fleet in America to drop by 99%. Currently, there's 245 million cars are registered and ready to drive in America. And they reckon that's going to be 2.4 million. This one's a very contentious figure, because if you talk to Americans, they say, we'll never give up our cars if they're 40 and older. If you talk to 20-year-olds, they're like going, car? Who wants a freaking car? I want to spend my money on other things. So it's going to be interesting to see how that comes out, but it's almost certain that the number of vehicles are going to go down. And when you think about that, there's some really interesting consequences. Technology. There we go. Now it's going to go 2 slides ahead, isn't it? Apologies, guys. Okay, we'll get there. Okay, there we go. So think about it. We're going from 245 million cars, and we're an auto trader, so this should have a real impact for anybody who works for Auto Trader. There are about, and again, these are all US figures, I don't know what they are for the UK, but there's about 900,000 are employed in motor vehicle and parts manufacture alone. But if we're no longer making a fleet of 245 million, the number of actual car manufacturers and how they make cars is going to be radically different in 20 to 25 years. Right? About 3 million in America in dealer and maintenance networks. Truck, bus, delivery, taxi drivers, about 6 million professional driving jobs in the States. We put that all around the world, it's going to be really amazingly different place to live in and work for a lot of people. Now, according to a Department of Transport report in the US, the economic cost of motor vehicle crashes in 2010 was about $242 billion. So much staggering amount of money. And it's about equivalent to approximately $800 per person alive in the States. And is actually 1.6% of the US gross domestic product for 2010. So another study showed, I'm sorry, my little clicker is being kind of crazy here. You're getting previews of all of this stuff. Okay, now let's get one. There we go. Okay, I have to promise you, on the screen here, it's actually showing that the other slide should be here. But you know what? We'll just move on. Okay, let's see what it is. So, all right. So, so Morgan Stanley estimates that this autonomous autonomous transport cloud will reduce the number of crashes by 90%, which will save 30,000 lives in the US alone and prevent 2.12 million injuries annually. What are we actually looking at here? Oh, it's actually aligned. Amazing. And obviously, this is actually a great result. But I wonder how this is going to affect emergency rooms, hospitals, ambulance companies. I know do you guys have ambulance companies yet, or is it still National Health? Anyway, ambulance drivers, emergency services, tow truck operators. How's the auto industry going to respond? Auto insurance industry going to respond with a 90% reduction in accidents and a 99% reduction in the number of vehicles to insure? So massive change. Another one that I really like, because I hate paying for parking, is I was shocked to discover that parking is a $25 to $30 billion a year business in the States. There's something like 100 million and 750 million commercial parking spaces. When we get the autonomous transport cloud, what are we going to do with all those parking spaces? If you look around the center of Manchester, you'll see all of these multi-story car parks and underground parking. We suddenly have a lot more land available to house all the people who are now moving to the city, I suppose. Another thing that really sort of struck me that I haven't seen any studies on is, will we need social transport systems, such as municipal buses and subways, trains, trams? If the cost of running a autonomous transport cloud is so low, you've got to ask, would we really need that? If it's only including profit, $1 a mile, 50 pence a mile, or whatever it is going to be, it kind of starts asking, why do we need municipal vehicles? And also, if you don't really need that, how are we going to change the planning of our cities? So much of our cities are planned around routes for trains and access routes. So it's going to be some really interesting changes. How cities should be laid out can be completely different. Pretty much every municipality, industry, and every consumer, and all of you in this room, and all of your businesses that you're currently working for in this room, are going to be impacted just by this one part of autonomous machines. just the autonomous driving machines, the autonomous transport cloud. And it may not be next year, but I'm pretty sure it will be in my lifetime, unless I get hit by a human-driven car first. But this technology, which is this faster, cheaper, smarter devices, right? We're putting in these cars that are now being produced now and are being test driven across the world. They have the equivalent of the fastest supercomputer in the year 2000 is now just put into the car. It costs, you know, something like $150, $200 for that computer. So you've got to think that this is just the poster child. That tech is going everywhere. And it's not just about the autonomous vehicles. Oh, this is a nice one. So there's a really interesting one, because we've been having factory automation for a long time, but it's nothing like what's going to come. And it's going to particularly affect China, which is going to affect the rest of the world. 2015, there's a company called Changying Precision Technology Company, just outside of Shenzhen, China. They set up an unmanned factory run entirely by robots. It has automated production lines that use robot arms to produce parts for cell phones. The factory has automated machining equipment, autonomous transport trucks, and other automated equipment in the warehouse. Previously, there were 650 employees at this factory, and it's dropped to 60. So by putting in these autonomous machines that can work side by side with humans, they've got that down to 60. The robots produce 3 times as many pieces as were produced before. And perhaps more interestingly, the defect rate has gone down from 25% to 5%. So we get better, faster, cheaper products with less people. And, you know, I have to ask, and I know this is a very simplistic view, but with a reduction of workers needed to produce goods, at what point does the cost of logistics now outweigh the benefits of building something thousands of miles away? So I think we'll also see more local manufacturing, because all of a sudden the cost of labor is less impactful on why you would want to do it. Of course, pollution, air quality, and safety is a different matter. So the benefits of labor arbitrage is reducing. And I'm pretty intrigued to try and work out what the effect of the global supply chain is going to be like over the next 20 to 30 years. Because we also got the drop in the cost of transport, but we've also got the drop in the cost of making things. And we can have them made more locally and more personalized. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Because, you know, if you search pretty much any industry activity on Google and add robot to the search term, you'll find a company or startup looking at bringing some form of autonomous machines to bear on it. Pretty much everything. And not just physical machines, virtual machines too. I'm going to give you an example. Earlier this year, in a newspaper in Florida, the Tampa Tribune featured a company that's making a berry picking robot. And it actually has multiple picking heads that move across a field, picking about 25 acres over a 3-day period, which is the typical time for picking fruits as they ripen. And it has a vision system, which I hopefully will see in a moment, vision system, to distinguish between red and green strawberries, and is able to get under the leaves and find and pluck the right berries. This is actually a really tough problem. What was interesting about this to me is that it wasn't led by the cost of labor. It was rather a shrinking migrant labor force in the States. So they actually couldn't get the labor. And some 30% of strawberry fields are left unpicked in the States. So just by putting in automation at the time it's needed, we're able to basically take up the slack for work that nobody really wants to do anymore. It's backbreaking, drudge work picking strawberries. Not as bad as picking potatoes, but really bad for that. And it's something that was not possible to do economically with a machine until really last year. And there's another one which I kind of like as well. There's a Japanese company, I think a few months ago, announced they had opened a completely automated indoor lettuce growing facility. This produces 30,000 heads of lettuce a day. Fresher produce right in the heart of the city. So we don't even need farms anymore. Okay, so we've had, industrial robots and automation in agriculture for years, right? What makes this different is the level of smarts that can be included. Most notably, the ease at which robots can be programmed to do a task. They're really easy now to train them. The tasks can be more open-ended, and these smart devices can learn the best way to accomplish a job if you give them the right goal. And then sharing that learning with other connected devices, right? That's where the internet comes in. So when the Google car hits a situation it's never really come across before, and it learns how to do it, it shares that with all of the other Google cars. So every device that you've chosen to allow to talk to each other and of the same type can start communicating and start sharing learnings. This is could be scary or it could be really interesting. But what's really changed it is that these machines are now able to work alongside humans in a safe way. And it means that the machines can be used without special enclosures, without special cages, and it massively increases the number of tasks that can be semi or fully automated. But I want to sort of pull back out of the cool, geeky stuff and kind of point out some reality, which is that what's actually driving all of what I've spoken today has been replacing labor with capital, right? So we get rid of people and we put cheap machines in their place. There's a massive increase in productivity. And if you actually look, this is not a trend that's new, it's just that this trend is going to get much, much, much bigger. And because it's exponential. Humans aren't very good at looking at exponential curves, right? So, but the reality is really like this. This is actually based on real figures, but my graphic artist sort of wanted to make the curve a little bit prettier. But it illustrates it. The point being is that from 73 to 2011, contrary to what a lot of politicians say, there is 80% more productivity, but the wages are 1/8 of that, and this is going to continue. It's pretty much what's been driving humans for thousands of years. The reason I bring this up is when I'm talking about this stuff, and we'll talk a little bit later in another area which is going to go through some massive change, is that this effect on labor market is really going to be a major challenge for society. And those of us who are in tech and those of us looking need to really think about what this will be and affect the policymakers. I spoke to a Minister of Innovation in Australia a few months ago, about a month ago, about all of this stuff, and I was asking what he was thinking about. And he was like going, yeah, it's a real problem, we have no idea. He says, you tell us, what should we do? So, there are opportunities to affect policy, and we do need to think about it. And the income gap shows no sign of reducing. I mean, that's pretty clear. But on the flip side, many soul-sucking jobs will be done away with. And I think leaving humans with what I hope will be more engaging and fulfilling lives. I don't know, more time for the beer, right? Whatever it is that you'd like to do. So, we can talk about this stuff, and it can be really overwhelming if you start looking at these figures and looking at what the impact's going to be. It can be very, very overwhelming. But for me, one of the things we have to do is how this will affect us, people in this room, and how should our businesses respond? Because we're probably working for some businesses now that, like the horse-drawn carriage age, will just not be there in a few years. But some of them are able to move and to become something new. And I think what we have to look at is our markets, industries, the ecosystem around them. We can see areas where there are still massive possibilities to replace labor with capital and create new value and new ways of delivery. So although we will be replacing labor with capital, there is also great opportunities to create new businesses and new technology and new ways of working. And it might not be your market or business that changes. It might be also a change in your ecosystem might have surprising consequences. You can guarantee that your competitors, we're all working for companies here, I think, but you can pretty much guarantee that your competitors will be looking at this even if you aren't. And this technology is not just about physical robots, machines, and the Internet of Things. You know, I was recently talking to some legal people, and they pointed me to a survey of law firm leaders. So this is, now we have too many lawyers in the States, but I think it was the top 10 law firms have said that within 10 years, 35% of first-year attorneys, which is the legal system in the States, is the first-year attorneys do a lot of the work, and 50% of paralegals will be replaced by an IBM Watson-like computer. And that's what the leaders of the law firms believe. And certainly based on the evidence I've seen, I think that's going to be pretty accurate. So there's a huge white-collar set of jobs that are probably going to disappear or change radically or become massively more productive. So you can have one paralegal in 2, 3 years, 4 years, being able to do the work of 10, 20 paralegals. Although I have to say that I kind of wonder, because in America anyway, I wonder if the legal AIs will actually be seen as additional billing opportunities rather than actually replacing people. All right. Let's talk about food. I love food. You know, there are several, I don't know if you keep an eye on the market, but there are several new smart ovens and refrigerators and other kitchen appliances that are announced or in beta, and they're really cool. You know, these are connected ovens, connected fridges. You go to the fridge, it can sense when your milk is off. It will then, you know, send you a message to say, hey, your milk's off. Notice you're in the supermarket. Don't forget to buy some more milk. Brilliant. Right? A lot of them include these new sensors that are coming on, and the range of sensors you can buy, even as a hobbyist. You can go down out to your local, is it Maplin in the UK? But you can go and get an amazing range of sensors. But there are new ones which are very much more focused on biosensors. There's some new techniques coming there, using synthetic DNA, which is another thing you should all be watching for. That will be truly the end of humanity. The cookers actually kind of know. I saw one recently where you put I have to be careful on my NDA agreements, but I think this is now public. Basically, you put the ingredients into the oven, it knows what it is. It uses a smart camera, uses the same computer that's actually in the Tesla cars to do the image recognition. So what was the most expensive mainframe is now actually going to be in a real product next year in a cooker, in a smart oven. Recognizes what's there. They're connected to the internet, of course, to the cloud, so they can reference recipes and image libraries to try and recognize it. They can share, so if it gets it wrong, or one user says, no, this wasn't that was not chicken, that was actually a capon. They would then be able to share that learning with all the other connected ovens. And of course, the company who owns this knows exactly what everybody's eating. And they can share eating preferences and make suggestions. Pretty damn cool. But, you know, this generation of products that's going to be released next year is somewhat like Ford's new automatic parallel parking. Have any of you seen that? When Ford, they have a little video where it parks itself. And it's nice and all, and it's a stepping stone, but it isn't really going to revolutionize the world. It's the fully autonomous vehicles that are going to revolutionize the world, not the park it yourself, because I just can't park. So in a lot of the IoT stuff, when we're looking at IoT and connected devices, the stage we are in now is that we're taking existing appliances and making them smarter. They help a person who's already making food in their kitchen make better food. They remove some of the friction of being an amateur cook, but they don't really change anything. So this is actually a London-based company who did this little video, showing that you could actually do a robot chefs I'm fascinated by this. I love it, right? But I don't actually think we'll be seeing this in anybody's kitchen. Right? This is not a this is a toy and a gimmick. It's not a real thing. Why? Because I think what will happen in the food and food prep industry is that we need to look at what we would all in this room really want if it was available at the right price now. And what I believe we really want is perfectly cooked meals that match exactly with our health goals, right? As shown by my wireless insulin monitor and my Fitbit and what I've told I want to achieve, and our individual taste. I mean, who wouldn't want that, right? And I think we want to have that for every individual member of your household, right? So that's very different from coming up with a robot chef. Now, my roommate in San Francisco is a personal chef, and he provides pretty much that service, except for the monitoring of the Fitbit and the insulin, to the extremely wealthy in San Francisco. And I have to say, if I could afford it, I'd use him. He's a really good cook. He cooks exactly what people want. He's really pays absolute attention on what their tastes are and what their health goals are, and he delivers really awesome food to people who can afford to have that personalized service. So it's kind of instead of thinking of, so this is what you should do with all connected devices and all IoT things, all classes, you've got to step back and go, what would we really want if we could have it? And I think my proposal on the food stuff is what we really want is a personal chef, nutritionist, and personal shopper all rolled into one service, right? Creating those individual food options to each member of the household. So do you guys have Amazon Fresh here? Do you know what that is? You have like a 1 hour delivery from grocery stores. Yes, no? Well, in San Francisco, you can go to Amazon.com, and you can actually put in what you want, and it is literally delivered within an hour. In fact, Instacart doesn't have a service. Sometimes it can be 30 minutes. You can literally get the food you want. But imagine somebody like Amazon who has this amazing distribution system, and these distribution warehouses are getting more and more local. And Amazon Fresh was reading my Fitbit, my blood sugar monitor, learning what I do and don't like, just like the Netflix does in the States, what I like about my entertainment, what about my food, and matches and starts making suggestions. Then in the local distribution center, they're using the robots, right, industrial automated machines, to prepare and organize ingredients, right? Because you can do that almost completely arbitrarily to the precise needs of that moment. They don't really have to do much planning, right? They can take ingredients and they can chop them and prep them and put them into however it's going to work. Magic happens there. It can then take those and put them into the tray specifically for your taste and your recipe and your desires. Put some nitrogen in so it stays fresh, right? Which is better than you taking it from the supermarket and bringing it home. And deliver it to my door in an hour. I put that tray into a smart oven. It knows what the recipe was. It knows how I like that particular thing cooked. And it does the final cooking, stirring, heating, etc., using just the ingredients and tastes I want. It's kind of like these coffee capsules, right? It's like that, but for fine food. Now you may think this is all a flight of fancy. I've actually seen most of that demonstrated in startups in Silicon Valley in the last year. Okay, so it's coming. Now it may not be the thing. The services we're talking about now may not be the ones that really win, but it changes the way we think about the physical world when we start bringing in the connectivity, the really smart machines, and new services that are going to massively disrupt existing industry. And I hate the word disrupt, but it really is going to. What will grocery stores do? What will the 7-Elevens and actually, when the cost of having something so good prepared for you in less than an hour and delivered and made, and maybe an hour and a half, is less than the cost of getting some terrible food from a takeout, what's going to happen to the takeouts? And I think one of the keys to this is this mass personalization and customization that we are seeing in the virtual world. It's going to start coming to the physical world. That's what these services will do. And they're going to be big services. If you think about that service I've just described, as I say, all the pieces there, nobody's put it together yet, but I've seen all of that. What will matter to us as the consumers is that we're going to get a better result for less effort and cheaper than it is now. Same way that I personally tend to use Uber around the world rather than taxi services. It's cheaper and usually better. Certainly friendlier. And it gives us time. So when you're trying to be, we all have to be futurists, right? And you're looking at all of this stuff and this tech and everything else. The ones that are going to win are the ones that remove friction from a problem we really have, and the ones that give us time. What we do at that time is going to be a more interesting thing. Of course, we'll have a lot more time because we won't actually have any jobs. But thank God the food is going to be cheaper. So again, I'd say, what does it mean to food distribution? Grocery stores, fast food chains. I kind of think they're either going to take advantage or go out of business. Do you know McDonald's hasn't changed its service model since the 1950s? They're just suddenly having to start to do that. So if you actually go into, I don't know if you've ever been to a McDonald's in the States, but there are a lot of people in that place, all on minimum wage, but they're all working very, very hard. And that hasn't changed since the 1950s. And they've just suddenly discovered that they can no longer compete because actually better food, cheaper, more efficiently made is coming to a neighborhood near them. I'd rather hope McDonald's does go out of business, actually. That's just me personally. We all need to be focusing on the real needs. When we're talking about IoT, connected devices, autonomous machines, technology, the real lesson to me is, what are the real needs at the end of the supply chain? Because it's pretty likely in your business, you may be in the supply chain somewhere, you may be direct to consumer, but it's pretty clear to me that there's probably a new chain forming somewhere, and you're not even aware it's happening. So look into your industries and look upstream, downstream, and sideways, and see where is opportunities to reduce friction, big friction, right? What the real end user of the chain wants, as well as where is the labor that could be replaced. I would actually call this human-centered service design. You know, to go back to the smart cooker, do you want a smart appliance, or do you really want the services of the nutritionist, personal chef, and personal shopper? Do I really want a single-use car, or do I want a transportation cloud that has the right class and type of vehicle is available to me in less than a minute, at a price that's less than owning the cost of a vehicle, right? Because that's coming. It'll free my commute to be able to work, talk to my kids, improve my chest, whatever it is you want to do, right? Same with the food. And I have better quality food that makes me healthier, my lifestyle. I can now use that time to do other things, like sitting in front of the TV and watching another repeat of Coronation Street. But the drivers are not really different from the drivers for the last few hundred years, right? This is nothing new. This has been going on for a long time. But it is enabled by the advances in this tech. I just want to reiterate, this revolution is driven by connectivity, right? It's driven by robotics, AI, machine learning, and faster, smaller, smarter devices. I might have already covered some of this, but you know, one of the dangers of playing at being a futurist, which I do pretend, well, I don't really pretend to be, I play at being a futurist, is that there are actually always more questions than answers. But I think if we keep an overall keep looking at the overall macro drivers, keep an eye on how alternate value chains may grow and displace your business, and starting on what consumers really needs rather than what we can make machines do. And because we all need to be futurists, particularly in this room, we need to be adaptable and nimble. Right? That's the other thing that I think is coming for all of us, particularly technologists, because humans are actually rather bad at predicting the future. Not great. You know, we can make machines do anything, but not everything is worth doing. And I think we really need to know what these technologies can actually do. And one of the things I would suggest, I talk to all of the technologists I work with, and we're very stuck with whatever a particular thing is, PHP or Java or embedded C or designing hardware or creating cool devices, whatever it is. But we kind of have to keep looking at the emerging tech capabilities. Because one of the things that I think is pretty clear is that anybody who's writing, we've been saying this for 20 years, but I think it's really about this time, how we write software systems is going to radically change in the next 20 years too. There's actually a really nice example of that. The DARPA, which is the big research, the US government puts all of, Department of Defense puts all of this money out and does prizes for interesting technical problems that are way in advance. And they've actually been driving most of this tech. And one of the things they did was they took the software that was written for, I think it was for an autonomous car, actually, and they were able to take it, that had been written by humans, and they were able to take it and create a good enough specification that they then gave it to a machine learning algorithm that they had created on the cloud, and it produced 30% less code. It executed, I think it was twice as fast, and they couldn't understand it, but they couldn't get it to fail. So, you know, how we think about computer systems and software is going to be radically changing over the next 15, 20 years too. So none of us are safe for these jobs. The other one that I'd ask you all to think about is that if you actually take the job titles and job roles from 1947, you know, I can't remember exactly what the figures are, but the top 100 is like there's 3 million bus drivers, there's 3 million nurses, there's all of these things all the way down. The only difference in that list between 1947 and this year is that number 90 is computer programmers and web designers. So when we think that, oh, but it's okay, new tech, there are new jobs and new industries starting. Yes, but in the last 30 years, all it's done is put computer programmers and web designers and people associated with software at number 90. The other jobs, both white collar and manual, are all at risk of automating away. So we're going to have a massively interesting society in 20 years. Right? Standard wage for all. So I'm sort of sideswiping a little bit through my talk, so I hope this is interesting. But, you know, the one I'm going to give you is Kodak. Do you remember Kodak? Do you remember film cameras? Does anybody remember those? Yeah, those are great. I still have a roll of undeveloped film from, I think it was 1976. I don't even know if I can actually get it developed now. I don't think I can, unless I go to a specialist place. The point about that is that the competitor for that was not the digital camera. The reason Kodak went out of business, really, it wasn't the digital camera. It was that there were new ways of meeting the enduring human need for capturing memories and sharing stories. Right? That's why we used to have cameras. Yeah, you have professional photographers who would, and amateurs, serious amateurs who would be like all about how to frame it and what the f-stops were and all of that stuff, and they still are here. But most people use them for click and shoot and get them developed, and they captured our memories, and they allowed us to share the story of where we're at and what we're doing. And that was the enduring human need, and that hasn't gone away. And I would actually say that the people who've really replaced Kodak is Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, because they're the new ways of taking those images, videos, stories, and texts and presenting them out for us to be able to create our own story. Who survived in the 1900s era? Out of thousands of carriage makers, only a couple actually made the transition to horseless carriages and became car manufacturers. So I think it was 4,000 to 5,000 carriage makers. I think it's 2 actually end up making cars, which is kind of interesting. So I'm going to leave you, leave this part of the talk with a Kennedy quote. I will, if I can. I hope it is. Change is the law of life. those who look only to the past or present are certain to miss the future. I think that's a pretty good quote. Certainly one that I've tried to most of my career to adhere to, which has kept me employed. And I think everybody else should do. Thoughts, questions, comments?
Well, before, you were talking about change, and as you already mentioned, this is something that has happened before.
Yes.
Marx's quote was it related to mechanization of farm, and should have freed up part-time, or actually probably invented a load of spurious industries.
Yeah.
Our time, like suing each other with the state agency, packaging up the debt as something to sell on. So I don't see why this time will be any different.
I think it's because of the scale. I think the Industrial Revolution was about taking people and turning them into machines. Right. We needed labor, right? So we're going through the process of automating farmyards, but really the Marx's quote at the beginning is a lovely quote, because he was talking about specialized labor being replaced, right, by machines, and then you needed unspecialized labor to operate them. So you take that to the next logical conclusion, which is now possible, is that we don't need the unspecialized labor either. We need a very small amount of that. So I think it's the scale. I think it's the fact that the exponential curve is going so great, and that it's clear that most people are not being paid more. I remember I graduated high school in Birmingham, in England, back in the 80s, and at the same time, I think at that point, wasn't it 15 to 20% unemployment was in the UK, which is, Americans can't believe that was ever possible and why there wasn't a revolution. But that was a structural change caused, maybe it was right, maybe it was wrong, but it was caused by a political desire to make massive structural change to the way the UK economics worked, and to basically get rid of the car, steel, and coal industries, right? Rightly or wrongly. But my father-in-law, or future father-in-law, was a very skilled and specialist toolmaker. And he'd always, through his entire life, his first 20 years of work, had always been very highly paid as a toolmaker. And he was made redundant with no payout, effectively, a few £1,000s. And I can honestly say that he has never, since then, he's in his 70s now, he has never been able to recover to that level of economic wealth that he had when he was in his 20s and 30s. So yes, it might happen again, but I would lead you to that chart, and I wish I had it in this presentation. It's in another one I have, where it literally shows all of the jobs that are likely to disappear. And this, yes, there are new things like estate agents and lawyers have always been there. Estate agents and computer programmers and all of these things. But those new jobs in the last 65 years, whatever it is, 67 years, have only risen to number 90. So the actual number of new jobs that may be created are probably going to be less and less paid than the. But fortunately, everything's going to get cheaper, so everything's going to be fine. But a good point. I mean, we can't tell what's going to happen. Yes.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. Secondly, I think there's a sweet spot. Because the reason why I say that is, if you look at some of the industries such as nursing in the UK, where we can't fill jobs fast enough to increase the number of people who get through the door and treat, things like autonomous vehicles would be great, because that reduces the actual queue that results in that being the supply demand. As you said with the Scorpio, that's another example. So when you get to the point where you reduce the queue, that's brilliant for everybody, all around, less stress on the people, less waiting time. But then after you get to the point where, if you like, supply outstrips demand, then you start to get job losses. So what other industries do you think, so in the UK or possibly in the US, will be affected in the same sort of way?
I actually think healthcare is going to be, that's a good example. I think healthcare is going to be radically changed. It's already happening. People, I don't know what it's like in the UK. Healthcare is an interesting one. It's a massive industry in the US, and I think it's quite a big, significant part of the GDP in the UK too. What's really interesting about that is that it's everything from having assister robots, right? The actual real robots to help change, move people who are bedridden to be able to do things that you would normally need a human to do, right the way through to better health monitoring. And there's actually several different trends coming in, and not just in computers and IT and AI. If you follow what's happening, I mentioned in brief synthetic DNA and some of the work that's going on in that area. That's way beyond my expertise, but I've heard some pretty interesting talks about what is happening in there, where you can 3D print DNA now. So for about $1,000, you can buy a DNA printer, which is pretty wacky. And then, with the new CRISPR technology, which allows you then to take that DNA that you've just printed and then actually have it reproduced through existing organisms, it's kind of interesting. So we could actually have glowing babies if we wanted to right now by changing our DNA, and then our children would always glow in the dark. Yes?
You talked about a lot of economic risks and employment risks. It's not like only the internet things, it's the technology risk, it's the everything connected to everything else. Ars Technica article recently, they got some white hackers into a medical devices company and they pawned everything. What do you think about the risks, the technology risks of doing this, please?
I think they're huge.
Sorry?
I think they're huge. So I'll just repeat it to everybody else. The question was, if I get the question right, correct me if I'm wrong, but what are the consequences just for technological risks? We have economic risks and societal risk and actually structural risk that this tech's bringing. But the real risk is there's another risk, which is privacy, security of these devices. Yeah, we're just waiting for the big one. An example, so I did a lot of connected home and automated building systems and smart buildings. And I'll give you one example. There's a massive hotel in Las Vegas that has 50,000 wireless sensors built into the hotel. They're all completely open. There's no security on it whatsoever. Anybody can go in with a sniffer and actually find out what's happening. And some of them have controllers, so you can actually control the in-room air conditioning and what have you. So maybe it wouldn't be a disaster if anybody did that, but you never know. You know the little Belkin switches that, internet connected? They have Linux. There's a nice little hack I saw on that where you could actually go in and hack into it and just turn it on and off really, 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 really fast, which is a really dangerous thing to do if it's connected to a heater. It can actually cause fires. So yeah, I think we are. And the level of concern in the industry, there's lots of things writing about it, but I talk to the engineers and they're just going, whatever, not my problem. Nobody's willing to pay for it. So yeah, we're going to be, it's interesting things. The best thing for that is actually to have lots and lots of competition. And if you ever do any IoT devices, don't send them through any third parties. Don't use if then this, if this then that. Don't use the Google Nest cloud service, because the more we have centralized services, the more risk it's going to be. So as an IoT designer, and I actually do run teams and actually build products, I'm in the last 2 years have moved away as much as I can from actually having everything. The default is I send all of my data and all of my ability to control it to some server in the cloud or some service. And it's easy because people are cropping up these all the time. The reality is we shouldn't be doing that. We should be saying, what is the least amount of information and the most value I can get from actually connectivity? And can I do it without using somebody else's service? Because that way I'm safer. But that's a pipe dream. Consolidation of the internet is continuing. 90% of all traffic goes through 6 brand names.
Is there like a chance in software in the future, software engineers, or particularly people involved in this field, need to have liability insurance to ride like a doctor or someone?
I have no idea. I've never thought of that.
So it kind of seems like the only logical way out of it is that perhaps companies will get insured to the point where they can still operate, pay a lot of cash for insurance, but still operate without, the fear that if something went wrong with their autonomous car, drove off the road and killed a bunch of people.
It's kind of interesting. I was actually talking to an auto insurance company in Australia a couple of weeks ago, and they were saying they are really recognizing that their next 20 years are going to be very different. It was a very forward-looking company, and the execs I was talking to, they were saying, again, I don't know how much I can say under NDA, but they were talking about how they're changing how they think about what they are as insurers. And that's exactly the sort of thing they would insure. Changing from the drivers to the programs. It's going to be cool though, right?
Can I just add to that actually? Because if you've worked in public utility or serious financial services or airlines, you already have to have that at a significantly higher level than normal contractors.
Yeah, I think I was actually speaking to a colleague who worked earlier using that book when he went freelancing from some normal job to working for Barclays or anyone else. They immediately told him that you have to put this much more on top of your life to do it.
Which shoots your opinion off from time as well.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. So as soon as we get AIs that are better at programming than we are, right, the insurers are going to reduce the rates for the AIs and increase the rates for the humans, perhaps. There was another question. Yes.
So this question about the AIs, we want to know AI is playing more and more important role in our lives, but they're going to the rate that they're increasing in capabilities is simply exponential.
Yes.
And so that can only really lead to one thing, that probably in the lifetimes, that the machines will be better at this to which they So
yes.
And the TED talk on this subject, and I know it sounds like that's science fiction, we can't quite visualize that, but it's just, we know that on all the graphs are telling us this. It's like the writing is on the wall. We know this.
Yeah.
So it's like, what is going to happen to us? It's kind of a really profound question, and I know it's like on the Elon Musk talks about this a lot, and I think Stephen Hawking talks about this a lot. Like, we're going to see the biggest change that the entire human civilization has ever experienced.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what are we going to become? Are we effectively going to be replaced? I mean, it kind of sounds almost like Terminator or like Silence and stuff. It's like science fiction explored this. It's not necessarily, doesn't necessarily get in as plausible.
It depends whether or not you think, welcome to our new overlords, or whether you think what we've actually got is each of us can now become robot herders, right? Where we can actually manage technology and tools, both personally and within our businesses, to be significantly more productive. So if you think of it in terms of they're replacing you, I don't think that's actually what's going to happen. I think what's actually going to happen is that there are thousands of jobs out there. Well, first of all, certainly in the global north, there's this whole idea that hard work is actually a moral value. Right? We have to work harder, and we should feel good about working harder, which I personally believe is kind of a lie. I actually much prefer not to work at all, and I still feel good about myself. It's really weird. If you do that for 6 months, the first month is awful, and then you get over it. Just don't work. But I think what also comes there is that we will be able to do more. So I think one of the things that I think about AIs and machine learning, and I can't reiterate, the reason I bring this up in Internet of Things talks is because the things are beginning to get that smart, right? And the point about them is that they're kind of like idiot savants, right? Like humans, we have people on the autism scale, and some of them are very, very narrow. They're brilliant at doing the one thing, but they can't do anything else. And I kind of think that's where we're at. The general AI thing, who knows? Is there a general purpose AI that's going to be smarter than us? I have no idea. Different people have different views on that. Was that? It's more of a discussion at this point. Yes, sir. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, we're in a very different world. I'm not saying that it's all doom and gloom. I'm saying it's changing. And, we have, there's much better speakers and smarter people than I am are saying these things. But I sometimes think it's good to really think about it in terms of how can we as just practitioners in our field predict it? And you're right, the energy is, you get rid of 99% of all cars, you have a massively different demand on gasoline. I think in the States, 30% of all greenhouse emissions are actually through vehicles and lorries. I think it was UPS globally managed to reduce their fuel consumption globally by, I think it's 10%. I can't be exactly what the number is, but it's quite a significant amount, just by changing the GPS to choose to always do left turns instead of idling to take a right turn, or vice versa, depending which country you're in. It's kind of an interesting, just one change in GPS massively changed the gas. So yes, autonomous vehicles are going to be massive.
Isn't there effectively going to be zero effect on emissions, because it's not that there's going to be less cars doing things simultaneously, it's just they're not going to be hanging around not using gas. So you're still going to use the same amount of gas, maybe more, because they're more.
No.
They're easier to use.
No. So for example, the Freightliner who make the big trucks in the States, those massive grade ones that are just so gorgeous, big and powerful. They've demonstrated a system in, I think it was in Nevada last year, where they put together, they had a totally self-driving truck. And when they went into platoon mode, so they could put 6 trucks together, they could drive that far away from each other, and it immediately reduced improved the fuel efficiency by, I think it was 8%. So no, because self-driving cars are better drivers, much more able to save it. I also think they're going to be electric, so that changes it. Sorry?
When you're increasing the number of trivial journeys, like if a car turns up in 36 seconds, it's like, you can get the gear.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know if that any of these modeled that in, but I think you're right. You're right. It's probably likely. But then again, you won't have buses which have only got 3 passengers in them. So I don't know how impactful that would be. It'd be interesting to find out.
Will speed limits jump up at all?
I don't know. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, my expectation in the States is that within 15 years, we'll have what are now commuter lanes or lanes for ride sharing will become autonomous only.
Right.
And then I think it'll move, and then actually being a human driver is going to be like a motorbike driver now. It's like it's a hobby.
Yeah.
Right. And you can't really go places that most of the cars are yet. But these are my opinions. I mean, I'm talking about the future. Come back and tell me I'm wrong in 15 years. And yes, sir.
Really high capacity artificial intelligence. So we talk about 192 core systems here.
Yeah.
There's been a project in Manchester University for about 7 years at least called Spinnaker.
Right.
It's to design and develop a million core computer. And the idea is to aim to model the human brain, just like a neuron by about a billion cores here.
Wow.
That's still quite a small fraction of the number of neurons that we have in our head.
Yes.
Where do you see this fitting into, or that fitting into this sort of space? Is it going to advance in these kind of large scale?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the chip I'm talking about is designed for embedded systems. So it has 192 parallel core plus if you're interested in the tech stuff on this, it's a 4+1 ARM core as a supervisor and 192 parallel things. It's made by NVIDIA. And it's really low power, it's 5 watts. But they've already just come out with one that has 256 cores. And guarantee that they're talking about a 512. And it's a curve, right? It's just going to continue on. But the key there is that it's cheaper, faster, smaller, lower powered, right? It's the low power that really drives it. And the price. So I really could put in a full image recognition wall switch for a few dollars. I mean, maybe not this year, but certainly within 2 years.
I suppose the second question then comes into the focus: how do you program these things when you start to get to that sort of scale? It's a question for you.
Yeah, I think it's going to change. I don't know the answer to that. I think we're at the early stages of it. But, it's getting easier. I've done some pretty interesting started doing some interesting parallel programming work, but it's still very geeky and very, very techy. But it won't be for long. We'll come up with a higher level way of doing it. Yes, sir. Yes.
How are we going to manage software updates when I'm going to do light updates of my light switch?
Yes.
Different updates of the light switch.
Well.
And then change the firewall rules so that I can get some.
Well, you probably won't be able to do it because you'll have your own personal firewall, you'll have security, but most people won't give a damn. And they'll do the Apple model, which is you get upgraded whether you want to or not. or the Tesla model, who have demonstrated rolling out firmware updates to their car, you know, overnight. That's what they did. There was 2 years ago, they did an amazing thing, was that they did a firmware upgrade, and the next day everybody discovered they had 4-wheel drive. Right? And then a month ago they did it, and they suddenly discovered they'd take the hands off the wheel. It would beep at you because it detected actually that you weren't micro-correcting. So that's how it actually detects whether you're driving or not driving. But yeah, so I think you're right, but I think it's kind of scary because you kind of have to trust it. The Nest thermostat has a really famous one of that, which was the Nest did a firmware upgrade, and then it turned out there was a defect in that upgrade. And anybody who had a Nest in Minnesota, this was in the winter, and if you know what Minnesota is like, it's really freaking cold. It's colder than Manchester, right? It's very, very cold, dangerously cold. And they did an update that in certain circumstances meant that you couldn't manually change the temperature. So everybody's heating system shut off in Minnesota. And it took them about 4 days to do a fix for it. I don't know where the heck the class action suits, how they disappeared. They must have just given everybody in Minnesota a big load of money. I don't know. So, but yeah, I think we're in some really interesting times with mass updates. There's another one actually. There's a lock manufacturer for hotel doors, and you know, these electric ones with the cards. There are about 2 million locks in the world in hotels that have a little hole underneath, and you can take one of these and an Arduino and put this on the Arduino, and it gives you a serial interface, and you can actually, I think you can actually type unlock, and it just unlocks, and has no record. It doesn't even, and it's supposed to be connected to the hotel management system, but that is actually an engineering backdoor they put in for testing. It's not quite unlocked. There's some other things you have to do, but you can find it on the internet. So I believe they may possibly have fixed that, but I bet they haven't. I bet you can still do it. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yes, they will. Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I think actually it's this remote service management that is driving most of the true Internet of Things happening. It's this drive for being able to manage them remotely, manage the upgrades, do that. One of the products I built, definitely, when we changed it to being able to do over-the-air upgrades reliably, our support burden went down significantly on those devices. And when we could remotely hack in as well and see what was going on in the system, really reduced the cost. If you talk to people on the phone, they go, it's blinking red. And you realize they're actually colorblind. So. Any other thoughts, questions, comments? Yes.
I think people can have a little bit of money over
I think, truthfully, it's going to depend on humans wanting it. So if there's fear, yes. It's like, you know, do you really need a pilot today to land your plane? But nobody feels comfortable flying in a plane that doesn't have a person behind it, even though statistically you're more likely to crash because of your human pilot error than you are from the auto pilot. But there's no real reason why you couldn't land and take off planes automatically right now, other than the fact that there's a fear. So maybe for some things, sure. But you know, when we get to true driverless cars, I don't think I'd want a manual override. I'd want it to automate. My manual override would be a big red button that said stop, and it just carefully, you know, navigated to the side of the road. I'm not sure if I would want to interfere with all of the other really fast autonomous vehicles. Yes.
You know, you would be able to.
Yeah. Fail safe. Yeah, but does governments really want that? I mean, I'm pretty sure most governments would much prefer to have the override that forced you to actually lock all the doors and drive you to the police station. So,
that would be like non-drivers using them as well, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Overrides.
Yeah, but like the kidnappers could that easily, couldn't they?
Probably. Yeah, absolutely. unless you pay for the Uber XXXL version that has bulletproof Ubers with guaranteed extra security on it. Yes, sir.
I remember back in 1984, people were saying that people like software programmers would be replaced by machines. What went wrong?
I think they were wrong. Yeah, actually, I remember that too. And I think out of that push came a lot of interesting technology. In fact, most of the machine learning stuff we need now is actually being driven by government grants from Japan, US, and I think the UK to develop the 5th generation language, but they ended up actually developing really good image recognition programs and really good pattern recognition that required super class computers to run on, except I can now run it on a $100 chip back then. So I think some of it is we underestimated how difficult that job is. Right? I do think, but as I say, the number of programmers in the world does not really have a massive impact. Right? We're number 90 in England and in the US. In the rest of the world, we're even lower in terms of the numbers. But I think we will get more productive. Right? Already I've seen one that's actually quite interesting. Have any of you here heard of grid.io? So grid.io is quite interesting. That's an AI-based web design system, and it can do things like automated A/B testing, right? So it can just like for your website, it will start playing with what will work, and then it will just start correcting. And then because it's all connected on the central system, all the other A/B testing is going on. They can do these tiny little variations, and all of a sudden it learns what is a really good website. And that's coming on stream. It's in beta now. So I think around the edges we'll have more and more. I think there's a lot of work happening in the art tech community that's going to impact, where I know some artists who are doing things like they're becoming arbitrators of tastes, and it's like, Michelangelo never painted his paintings, right? Those big ones. What he did was he really was the chief artist, and then he had a whole bunch of people actually painting it. So I know some artists in San Francisco and in New York who are now creating robots and automation that they are literally just directing and then letting the machine algorithm kind of produce what it wants. And then they say, no, I don't like that, I like this. No, I don't. So we're becoming the arbitrators of taste as opposed to the executioners of the art. Yes, sir.
At what point are the philosophical and ethical communities going to get involved in these groups?
Probably about 10 years too late. I think it's already happening. I mean, I certainly have seen a lot of talk about the ethics of some of this stuff. The ethics of automated war, I think, is particularly scary. Right? But it's already happening. The removal of the wealthy nations from actually having to be part of the battle, I think, is a really significant issue. Remove the humanity. So yeah, is Terminator really going to happen? Maybe. Yes.
On the boring side of these things, I don't know much about it. And when I was sort of learning about, we have Hive, which I think is the UK equivalent of Nest. And there are things like you can buy a pack which gives you a sensor and a bell and a light. You can build your own. But it surprised me that there was no standards on the things, not even the same transport level, and there's no protocols. So none of these can actually talk to each other. I don't know if that's the same in San Francisco or whether it's a bit more.
So globally, it's there are some, and some of them, the brands themselves don't really want you to know that they're actually interoperable. But in the UK, I think it's called Z-Wave, has I think about 800 products certified to be interoperable. But they're coming. So Thread is a big one that's coming out of Google and Nest, which will be an open protocol, and a lot of people are taking it up. There's, let me see if I can get this right, Oil Join, which is one that's being proposed by, who are the people behind it? I can't remember now. It's not Samsung, it's LG and Qualcomm and a few others who are behind it. So they're moving into these competitive spaces. Apple, of course, with their stuff for home automation, is also pushing their own standard. So you will always get a few of those. HomeKit, it's called. So I think that's coming. It's coming at all levels. It's coming at physical interoperability, at the transport layers. It's also coming at the application layer. There's actually application layer that you need interoperability. You can always put a gateway or a bridge or something between different physical transports, but it's the fact that if I'm on the internet and I want to be able to talk to connect my thermostat to my door sensor from different manufacturers, yes, of course we want to be interoperable. It'll be there within. Well, it's kind of here now, but there are like 4 different legs. But I think in the next 5 years it'll be big. Any other questions? People are disappearing, so do feel free if we're running over time.
What's the coolest thing that you've seen in going forward? What do you think will be like the biggest catalyst for change? For everything was more connected, and we will speak to each other and try and make informed decisions based on information that we can get.
I'm not sure what you mean. Sorry.
The short thing is, what's the coolest thing you've seen?
What's the coolest thing I've seen? Just recently, I will show you. It's a friend of mine. He's an artist, a technical artist, and one of the things he just recently did was this. And I thought this was a good example. Now, this is not the most coolest, perhaps, but I just want to show you it anyway, if I can work out how to do it. So it's only a minute. God.
A bit.
So this I thought was this. Is that playing or not playing? There we go. So this is kind of interesting. This is the sort of thing that I think artists sometimes push the limits, right? So this guy, he puts the sensor on, and this, by the way, is the 192 core mainframe that costs $100 on Amazon, $200 on Amazon. Which allows him to do real-time 4K graphics rendering. But I kind of like this. I thought this was pretty cool. This is the guy. He put it together in about a week, in a weekend. He put the whole thing. He did the programming. He did the stuff. He has a sensor. He connected it to an internet. It actually goes Bluetooth to his phone to the cloud. Takes a sample every few seconds and sends it off every minute or so to the cloud service he's put up, and then it draws this art depending on where he's at. It's a performance art, but I thought that was pretty cool. That was the most coolest thing I've seen this week. I actually think some of the next generation of robot chefs, the ones where you put the food in and it just kind of does it all for you to your taste, I think that's pretty cool. I've seen that demonstrated. It's pretty damn neat. So, what's the coolest thing you've ever seen recently?
Which one's that? Yeah, I think you probably get a lot more exposure to it than me. As you said, it's cool and it's scary. It's the 3D printing of organic material, because you can also go on the internet and get Ebola and decide you want to print that at home.
Yes. Yeah.
As good as being able to 3D print.
Yeah, they run in Silicon Valley last year. They had, in America, you have these camps in the summer, so people send their kids to camps, often just for 2 weeks or whatever. Sometimes they're day camps, sometimes they're residential. And in Silicon Valley, this year, they had a camp for high schoolers to go and create your own DNA. So they actually had DNA for 16-year-old boys and girls. You've got to sit there and go, really? We're letting that technology into... Anyway, I've raised a teenage child. I know how dangerous they are. So yeah, I think you're right. I think the coolest actually is some of the stuff that's going on there. And there's some really interesting work on creating biological computers. So there's some real interesting stuff where you can use DNA and biological cells actually as logic gates. And I've seen some pretty cool shit about that. Really scary.
That gets past the muzzle as well.
Yes. In fact, you can now buy a $1,000 USB DNA sequencer that is, which is the same as the supercomputer they use to crack the human genome. You've got the analytical tools that are getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, and the software to work it is getting easier and easier to use. And then we've got 3D printers that you can print a DNA sample, and then you've got CRISPR, which is the technology. If you don't know what that is, everybody needs to know what that is, because it's going to be some scary shit coming out of that, where you can literally take your DNA. I'm waving hands, but because I don't really understand it, but I know the effect is that now we have ways of creating custom editing DNA and then being able to make that replicated across. So, any other comments, thoughts, questions? Yes, sir.
Seems like we're setting ourselves up for a really big problem in such a sense. It seems like from what you've described, we're going to have the biggest falling off of the number of jobs in general over the next 30 or 40 years than at any point in history yet. The population of the world is still growing faster than reasonably sort of at any time in history as well. So is there a chance that we're setting ourselves up for the greatest economical humanitarian disaster in history to happen over the next 30, 40 years, but so many people are going to be destitute and with no job?
I believe so. Yes.
And if so, is there anything we can do to try and make that not as crazy as it needs?
We can talk about it. It needs a change in policy. Right. I mean, the world. Turn the camera off. I believe that the world is basically owned by about 1,000 families, right? Most of the significant wealth of the world is. And I think they need to work out what they're going to do about it, including China. I mean, maybe the word own is perhaps not there, but major influence. But yeah, I think China's going to have a real interesting challenge.
It does make you wonder as well, with all the productivity going up and more things being created, if people are out of work and can't afford to buy the more things that are being created.
Yeah. So we put those in gated communities called prisons, and then everything will be fine. Yeah. Sorry?
Well, the TED talk I mentioned before, it's like it talks about like basically everyone's out of work will kind of move to a new system for society where we separate labour from earnings. At the moment, we sort of distribute wealth by labour. That's how we do it. No, because it's work until now. And now it's
there's another analysis on that, which I'm sorry, I can't just really respond to that, because there's a kind of an interesting analysis I heard recently where they said, when we talk about the Uberization and the Airbnb type services, what we're actually talking about is that we've started to decentralize capital. So if you think back what Uber really is, Uber is not you take your car and you suddenly start doing it. It's this unrealized gains of the capital you already had that you can now start realizing. And Uber is really smart because they don't own any of the vehicles, so they don't actually have any risk of owning capital. So they've found a way to decentralized capital.
I'm a little bit concerned that one company essentially controls the whole market in the same way that Airbnb is the one company that...
Yeah, I think it's terrible.
Maybe not owns the properties, but owns the marketplace in the same way that
absolutely.
Amazon owns the marketplace for
everything else.
Creating one bad centralization for a different one.
Yeah, I don't disagree. Yeah.
Like people anecdotally say that there's like an 80-20 rule, whatever, because all these kind of things, that 80% of everything will be owned by one player or one small player, which is kind of this long tail going on. But
yeah, I think it's
shilling or whatever, it's like a rate on the jump road or something. So you're doing it in the shape is the way that's how you shape the Jews on the new plot.
Are you saying it's always been feudal?
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
In a way, it has. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I can only, I have opinions on that stuff that are quite strong. So, yes. You had a question.
I was going to mention people everyone's worried about all our jobs being removed by automation. Just so happens that Finland is, I think, trying to get through Parliament to introduce a basic income guarantee.
Yes.
And you just give people money.
Yeah.
Guaranteed minimum income for everybody. Part of the reason why people are looking at this is because politicians and economists are really beginning to wonder what jobs will people have in 25 or 50 years' time.
Yeah, there's some really...
When there's so much wealth within economies, it's just not evenly distributed.
I think it's a really interesting challenge, and I think what's going to happen is the countries who are not set up to accept that reality are going to have most challenge. So I think America is going to be really challenged by this, because they believe hard work is a moral right, and if you're poor, it's because of your own fault.
Well, as it happens, experiments have been done in the US on basic income guarantees, and one of the things you find out is that when you actually give everybody a guaranteed minimum level, not necessarily a lot, but people still do want to work.
Yes.
They work for other reasons than income, and not everybody's lazy. So
exactly.
Perhaps there is hope for us all.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at the super wealthy as well, a lot of them work really hard, right? Who don't need to. And I've certainly, Bill Gates never needed to work, right? Everybody thinks he started in a garage. He didn't. He was absolute trust fund baby. His father was already a multimillionaire and never needed to work again.
I'd say watch Scandinavia.
I think so too. Yeah.
I think Sweden's going to be the first economy which is all renewables apart from transport vehicles. Yeah. So watch Scandinavia, most progressive. Most social.
I'd agree, except I don't hold out much hope for some of the other countries. I also don't. I really struggle with what's going to happen in Africa. I think we continue to. Anyway, I think you may be right in the West, but I think there's other parts of the world. I think India and China, Brazil. Brazil still has. I think it's the most unequal land distribution and ownership than anywhere else in the world. Like 90s, I can't remember what it is, but it's a really high percentage owned by, a handful of people. So I think you're right, but I think there's politics, and we're going to have to wait for some of the oligarchs to die and their grandchildren to take over.
You can only really do that sort of stuff, presumably when you've got a tax base to actually support it.
Yes.
More people are being employed, the income taxes larger, some of these earning for the treasurer, then there's going to be less money to pay for those kind of programs.
To some of these experiments, So to some of these experiments, I know one of the things that's a side effect of a guaranteed income is that people are actually willing to take more risks. So actually, new businesses do form. Sorry, sir.
About 20 years ago, I started up a talent-based website called ultimatebuzz.com.
Right.
And really, sort of almost jokingly, I thought I should really be investing in a site called ultimatebull.com,
right.
which would, if you like, transfer DNA to stock breeders.
Right.
And I take it that is possible now.
Apparently, yes. Apparently it is. You could 3D, I guess, I don't know. I actually don't know enough about the 3D printing of DNA to know what is science fiction, what is science future, and what is available now. I just know it's pretty crazy. Okay, does anybody want a beer? Are we out of questions or thoughts? We can gather outside or get a beer in and just talk if you want. Or...
Thank you.
I have to say, the most I enjoy is the conversation after this talk. I always learn something new.